Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The cold steel of a suppressor pressed against his temple was the only warning Julian got before the world tilted on its axis. Rain lashed against the dirty window of the back alley clinic, the rhythmic drumming masking the sound of the door shattering inward, but nothing could mask the suffocating, terrifying scent of burnt cedar and ozone that suddenly flooded the cramped room. It was a scent that triggered a biological alarm so potent it nearly buckled his knees, the scent of an alpha claiming his territory. Julian froze, his hand hovering over the zipper of his duffel bag, inside of which lay a handful of stolen cash and a forged passport. He didn't need to turn around to know who was standing behind him. The sheer oppressive weight of the air told him that the devil himself had come to collect a debt. Running is a habit of prey, Julian. A voice rumbled, low and vibrating with a dangerous mix of fury and possession. And you are terrible at being prey. Julian spun around, his own instinct overriding his logic, a hidden switchblade snapping into his palm. But before he could even slash the air, a large, gloved hand caught his wrist, twisting it with agonizing precision until the knife clattered to the linoleum floor. Dante Valerio, the capo of the Valerio crime syndicate and the most feared alpha in the city, loomed over him. His tailored charcoal suit was dry despite the storm outside, his silver eyes glowing with a predatory luminescence in the dim light. He didn't look at the knife. He didn't look at Julian's face. His gaze was fixed lower, burning a hole through Julian's wet shirt, staring directly at his stomach. "I told you," Dante whispered, stepping into Julian's personal space, forcing the smaller man back against the peeling wallpaper. "You don't get to leave. Not with what you took from me. I took nothing but my life back." Julian spat, though his voice trembled. The omega biology in him was screaming to submit, to bare his neck, but years of training as a vain assassin held him upright. "Let me go, Dante. The families are at war. If they find me here with you, let them come," Dante interrupted, slamming his hand against the wall by Julian's head, trapping him. "Let them burn the city down. I don't care about politics tonight. I don't care if you despise every breath I take. Hate me, Julian. Loathe me. But that is my child inside you, and you are never walking out of my sight again." The drive back to the Valerio estate was a blur of neon lights and suffocating silence. Julian sat in the back of the armored limousine, the leather cool against his feverish skin. The partition was up, separating them from the driver, creating a private cell of luxury. Dante sat opposite him, pouring a glass of amber whiskey with a steady hand, though the pheromones rolling off him were anything but calm. They were jagged, possessive, a storm contained within a glass bottle. Julian pressed a hand to his abdomen, a reflexive, protective gesture he hated himself for making. It had been one night of madness 3 months ago, the masquerade ball at the chaotic neutral zone of the Elysium Hotel. Julian had been there to put a bullet in Dante's head, a final bid to restore the honor of the Vane family, which had been decimated by the Valerios 5 years prior. But the heat cycle had come early, induced by stress and the suppressants failing. He should have fled. Instead, he had collapsed in the VIP corridor, and Dante had found him. Dante hadn't killed him. He hadn't called security. He had taken him. And now, the consequences of that fever dream were knitting together inside Julian's womb. "Drink," Dante said, sliding a bottle of water across the small table. "You're dehydrated." "I'm not thirsty," Julian snapped, looking out the tinted window. "The doctor at that clinic," Dante said, his voice deceptively casual. "He was a butcher, Julian. Is that how little you value your life? You were going to let an unlicensed back alley surgeon scrape away a life just to spite me?" Julian whipped his head around, his blue eyes flashing. "To spite you? You think this is about you? This is about survival. I am a Vane. You are a Valerio. If your people find out I'm carrying your heir, they'll kill me to keep the bloodline pure. If my people, what's left of them, find out, they'll kill me for being a traitor. This child is a death sentence, Dante." Dante leaned forward, the crystal glass clinking as he set it down. "My people do what I tell them to do. And as for the Vanes, you are chasing ghosts. There is no one left to kill you, Julian. Only me. And I have no intention of killing you." "Why?" Julian demanded, the question tearing out of his throat. Why didn't you kill me that night? Why hunt me down for 3 months? Just for the baby. Dante's expression darkened, a shadow passing over his sharp features. He looked away for a moment, a rare crack in his armor. It was a calculated hesitation, one that made Julian pause. A man like Dante Valerio did nothing without reason. If he hadn't executed a rival assassin during a moment of vulnerability, it wasn't mercy. It was strategy, or something deeper. Because, Dante said finally, his gaze locking onto Julian's again, intense enough to bruise. When I bit you, the mark didn't fade. Julian's hand flew to his neck, covering the faint scar hidden beneath his collar. A temporary mark usually faded within a week. A permanent bond, a soul bond, lasted a lifetime. It was a myth, a fairy tale told to young Omegas. Enemies didn't bond. It was biologically impossible for two lineages so steeped in mutual hatred to be compatible. You're lying, Julian whispered. We'll see, Dante said as the car slowed to a halt. Welcome home, Julian. The Valerio estate was not a house. It was a fortress carved into the cliffs overlooking the city. Iron gates, armed guards, and surveillance cameras that tracked every heartbeat. Julian was ushered into the master wing, a sprawling suite of mahogany and velvet that smelled overwhelmingly of Dante. For the next 2 weeks, Julian lived in a gilded cage. He wasn't locked in a cell. He had access to the library, the private gardens, and the gourmet kitchen. But he could not leave the grounds, and he was never alone. If the guards weren't watching him, Dante was. The morning sickness was brutal. It left Julian heaving over the porcelain basin every dawn, his body rejecting food, rejecting the situation. Dante was there every time. The ruthless king of the underworld, holding back Julian's sweat-dampened hair, wiping his face with a warm cloth, offering him ginger tea with hands that had strangled men. It was confusing. It was infuriating. One evening, the tension broke. Julian sat in the bay window, watching the rain batter the cliffs. Dante entered, loosening his tie, looking exhausted. The turf war with the southern triads was escalating. Julian could see the toll it took on the Alpha. Eat, Dante said, placing a tray on the low table. Roasted quail and herbal soup. I'm not hungry, Julian said, his voice flat. You haven't eaten since yesterday, Dante growled, patience fraying. You are starving him. Him. Julian laughed bitterly, standing up. You only care about the air. Once it's born, what happens to me, Dante? Do you put a bullet in my brain then? Or do you keep me as a wet nurse in the attic? Dante moved with a speed that blurred the air. He pinned Julian against the cold glass of the window, his forearm bracing against the pane above Julian's shoulder. Is that what you think? It's what I know, Julian hissed. You destroyed my family. You burned the Vane Manor to the ground. You killed my father. Why would you treat me any differently? Dante's face was inches from his. He could have crushed Julian. Instead, he exhaled slowly, his forehead resting against Julian's. The intimacy was shocking. I didn't kill your father, Julian. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Liar. Julian breathed, though his heart hammered against his ribs. I burned the manor, Dante admitted, his voice rough. I led the assault. But when I got to the study, your father was already dead. A bullet to the back of the head. Execution style. From a small caliber pistol. Not the kind my men use. Julian shoved Dante back, his mind reeling. That's impossible. My uncle. Uncle Silas said he saw you do it. He barely escaped. Silas. Dante said the name like a curse. Silas Vane. The man who inherited the offshore accounts the next day. The man who told you to come to the masquerade to kill me, knowing my security would tear you apart. Did he tell you to use the back exit? The one I keep unguarded. Julian went cold. Silas had given him the schematics. Silas had insisted he go alone. You're trying to manipulate me, Julian said, backing away. Stockholm Syndrome won't work. Dante straightened his tie, his mask of indifference sliding back into place, though his eyes remained burning hot. Believe what you want. But tonight, Silas is meeting with the triads. He's selling the last of the Vane territory. If he knew you were alive and pregnant with my child, he wouldn't see a nephew. He would see a loose end. Dante turned to leave. Eat the soup, Julian. For the baby. The seed of doubt had been planted. Julian spent the next 3 days in the library, hacking into the encrypted archives using an old backdoor code his father had taught him, a code Silas shouldn't have known, but Dante's system seemed oddly vulnerable to it. Or perhaps Dante had left it open. What he found made his blood run cold. Bank transfers. Time-stamped security footage from the night of the fire. A shadowy figure leaving the Vane study minutes before the Valerio trucks arrived. The figure had a limp. Uncle Silas had a limp from an old war injury. Julian sat back in the leather chair, trembling. His entire life's mission, his hatred, his vendetta, it had been directed at the wrong monster. Dante was a monster, yes, but he was an honest one. Silas was a snake. The realization was interrupted by the estate's alarms blaring. Red lights bathed the room. Gunfire erupted from the courtyard. Julian ran to the window. The gates were breached. Mercenaries in black tactical gear were swarming the grounds. Not Valerio men. Not police. Triads. The door to the library burst open. It wasn't Dante. It was Rocco, Dante's second-in-command, bleeding from a shoulder wound. "We're compromised," Rocco grunted, tossing a heavy pistol to Julian. "Boss is in the courtyard holding the line. He said to get you to the panic room." "Where is he?" Julian checked the magazine. "Full. He's drawing their fire. Silas Vane is with them. He wants you, Julian." Rocco collapsed, sliding down the doorframe. Julian looked at the gun, then at the window. His instinct, the Omega instinct to protect the child, screamed at him to hide, to run to the panic room and lock the steel door. But another instinct, the one that had flared that night at the masquerade, the bond he had denied, pulled him toward the fire. "My alpha is fighting." Julian stepped over Rocco and ran into the hallway. The courtyard was a slaughterhouse. Rain mixed with blood on the cobblestones. Dante was behind a marble fountain, pinned down by heavy machine gun fire. He was moving with lethal grace, returning fire, but he was outnumbered 10-1. At the center of the chaos, standing behind a wall of mercenaries, was an older man leaning on a cane. "Silas Vane." "Give him up, Dante," Silas shouted over the roar of gunfire. "Give me the boy, and I'll let you keep the city." "Over my dead body," Dante roared back, putting 2 rounds into an advancing mercenary. Julian moved through the shadows of the colonnade. He was heavy, slower than usual, his center of gravity shifted by the pregnancy, but his aim was true. He flanked the mercenary line. He saw a sniper on the upper balcony, taking aim at Dante's exposed back. "No!" Julian screamed. He raised the pistol and fired. The sniper fell, but the scream gave away his position. Silas turned, his eyes widening. "Julian, you ungrateful brat. Come here. You killed him." Julian yelled, stepping out from the pillars, the gun trained on his uncle. "You killed my father." Silas sneered, dropping the facade. He was weak. He wanted peace. He was going to sell us out to the Valerios anyway. I just sped up the process. "Kill him," Silas ordered his men. 3 mercenaries turned their weapons toward Julian. Dante broke cover. It was a move of pure, suicidal idiocy. Dante abandoned his safe position, sprinting across the open ground, roaring like a beast. He drew every eye, every bullet. He threw himself between the mercenaries and Julian just as the hail of lead erupted. Julian watched in horror as Dante jerked violently, impacts blooming across his back. But the Alpha didn't fall. He maintained his momentum, crashing into Julian and tackling him to the ground, shielding Julian's body with his own bulk. "Stay down." Dante gritted out, blood spraying from his mouth onto Julian's cheek. Dante rolled over, firing from the ground, his aim perfect even as he bled. 1, 2, 3 shots. The mercenaries dropped. Silas panicked, raising his own gun. But Julian was faster. From beneath Dante's arm, Julian fired a single shot. It struck Silas in the chest. The old traitor crumpled, the cane clattering away on the wet stones. Silence descended on the courtyard, broken only by the rain and Dante's ragged, wet breathing. "Dante!" Julian scrambled out from under him. The Alpha's suit was shredded. There was too much blood. "Dante, look at me." Dante's eyes were hazy, the silver light dimming. He reached up, his gloved hand trembling, and rested it on Julian's stomach. Is he okay?" Dante rasped. Julian choked on a sob, pressing his hands over Dante's on his belly. "He's fine. We're fine. Why did you do that? You idiot, why did you do that?" Dante smiled, a bloody, arrogant smirk that lacked its usual bite. Told you. My baby. My Omega. His hand slid away, and his eyes rolled back. Dante, Julian screamed. Medic. Get a medic out here now. The waiting room of the private Valerio clinic was sterile and cold. Julian paced the floor, wrapped in a blanket, refusing to leave. He had refused the sedative. He had refused to rest. 6 hours. When the surgeon finally emerged, he looked weary. He's alive. The Kevlar lining in his suit stopped the rounds from piercing the heart, but the impact broke 4 ribs and punctured a lung. He lost a lot of blood. But he's an alpha. He's stubborn. He'll live. Julian let out a breath he felt he'd been holding since the clinic alleyway. He sank into a chair, his hand drifting to his stomach. The baby kicked, a flutter, soft but distinct. The first time he had felt it. Can I see him? He sedated, but I don't think I could stop you. Julian walked into the ICU room. Dante looked pale against the white sheets, tubes and wires monitoring his vitals. The imposing, terrifying Mafia Don looked almost human. Julian pulled a chair to the bedside. He reached out and took Dante's hand. The skin was rough, calloused from violence, but warm. As if sensing the touch, Dante's fingers twitched. His eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus. You're awake, Julian whispered. You? Dante's voice was a rasp. You stayed. Where else would I go? Julian asked softly. You destroyed my enemies. You saved my life. And apparently, you were telling the truth about the bond. Dante squeezed his hand, weak but insistent. Does that mean you don't hate me? Julian looked at their joined hands, then at the monitor showing Dante's steady heartbeat. He thought about the fear he felt when Dante fell. He thought about the way the baby had kicked the moment Dante was safe. I think, Julian said, leaning down to brush his lips against Dante's knuckles, that hate and love are 2 sides of the same coin, Dante. And you have a lifetime to figure out which side lands up. Dante let out a low, pained chuckle. I like those odds. Rest now, Alpha, Julian commanded softly, placing Dante's hand on his stomach. We aren't going anywhere. Dante closed his eyes, his breathing evening out, his hand resting possessively over his unborn heir and the Omega who had finally stopped running. The cage was still there, but perhaps, Julian realized, he held the key just as much as Dante did. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Dante risk it all for his obsession, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a husband who kidnapped you to save your life? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,